समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti. As the year ends, this is our final episode for the year where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for international and strategic affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments around the world. To begin with, a disclaimer that we have gotten an overwhelming number of questions for this episode, which was close to 25. It is not realistically possible to take all your questions at one go, but please rest assured that we will take the questions in the coming episodes. And today's first question, Swasti, I will take on China, which is from our user Navneet Rohilla, who says that there's a lot of popular defense commentary that mocks or downplays Pakistani and especially Chinese defense hardware. In your opinion, what is the realistic situation of Chinese defense, and how do you view the gap between what the public narrative is and what China's actual capability trends are?
Well, thank you for the question. As far as Navneet Rohilla's questions are concerned, I mean, he's been a very, I would say, regular watcher, and I myself actually should want to give you a compliment on just how much you seem to know, because your questions are often very discerning. Yeah, so just coming back to the question that he's asked about China's perception. See, there is a perception in India that Chinese weapons are second quality weapons or second rate weapons. They are not as battle tested, etc. And for a while, it held true, because China indeed has not really fought a battle, especially in the modern times, to battle test those weapons. And in the weapons industry, the value of a weapon actually only comes from battle testing, and that is why anything that is now being tested in the Ukraine war has become a pretty much a gold standard. So you have a battle tested in Ukraine as one of the certifications of weapons. Quickly, as far as the Chinese weapons are concerned, that perception is changing. How is it changing? In short, what the Chinese are doing is that even though they are not directly involved in, let's say, faraway conflicts in Middle East or in Africa, but they are using their own proxies. So, for example, you may be hearing a lot about the fact that Emiratis are backing Sudanese militia and they are against the Houthis. And they are sourcing Chinese drones, and the Chinese drones are battle tested there. Similarly, Operation Sindoor became one incident when the PL-15 missile got battle tested. So, long and short, I do not agree with this perception that Chinese weapons are second-rate weapons or Chinese weapons are not battle tested. They may not be as battle tested as the US weapons or the European weapons, but in their own way and through subsystems integration, they are now finding access to several battle zones, and India must keep an eye on that. So I do not agree with that perception, and we should be having a more objective analysis on what they are capable of. And the second thing that the Chinese have shown is that they've been very, very quick at learning from their mistakes. So I think it is also this part that India needs to analyze more objectively. It's no weapon is 100% accurate in the first go or in its first generation. You go on improving, and that is why the data that you require for it, and if the Chinese have access to that data through the Russia-Ukraine war from Russia's perspective, or from backing Russia, it is as good as saying that they have access to real-time data. So that's one part. The second part is that even as numbers go, Devdatta, the numbers, in fact, in the previous episode, I gave a breakdown of numbers. So, Chinese defense spending, which is close to $250 billion. Right. Some sources say it is close to $300 billion. Now, if you keep it on the one hand, it is still larger than India, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan's defense budgets put together. So it's not just, so this difference is not just numerical, it's actually exponential, okay? And then there are many, many things, I mean, look at the entire worldview with which, or look at their entire spectrum, towards capabilities. they are dedicated to making their armed forces world-class armies, right? So while we are still stuck at Jal Thal Nab, which is Army, Navy and Air Force, the Chinese have already gone to the Army, Navy, Air Force, the rocket force, and then the information warfare spectrum, right? So that's another part. And then, you do not make sense of China just by seeing what kind of weapons they are inducting or what kind of missiles they're inducting. I mean, if you really understand it well, you will see that China is advancing its interests, okay, through having control on technology, on 5G, on data centers. Now, data centers today is the latest kid on the block when it comes to a great power rivalry. The kind of the kind of domination they have in rare earths, all of this together, plus the weapons and plus the massive spending, is what makes China so formidable. So in the Chinese mind, and I keep saying that, in the Chinese mind, India is not really a peer. The only peer they have is the United States, which of course at about $1 trillion of defense budget is still far ahead of China. But China is closing that gap soon, because China is coming up with very new and very agile solutions to really catch up with the US.
Since we are on the China question, Navneet also has a question on India's chicken neck and the Seven Sisters, and he says that, do you think the Siliguri corridor and the broader Northeast could become a strategic vulnerability for India?
Well, it is already a strategic vulnerability for India because it's a narrow strip of land. The Siliguri corridor is a very narrow strip of land. It is located in West Bengal and it connects mainland India to the northeastern states. Okay, and its narrowest point is just 22 kilometers wide, and it's flanked by Nepal and Bhutan, and Bangladesh. So you have all these countries around it. Now, what makes this a bit complicated? Of course, on the one hand, that the current, after the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, first the caretaker government, and then a series of statements have been very anti-India, have been very, and they have not really made a lot of sense, but then they have been anti-India. So if you remember, Mohammad Yunus had gone to China and given some very problematic statements. So that's one part. Does Bangladesh have the capability to do something in order to sort of, break the chicken necks and sort of divide Indian mainland? I don't think so. But I think what we need to be careful about is the fact that you have Bhutan right there. And if you remember in 2017, when we had a face-off with China on Doklam, which is, of course, a direct conflict between, it's not a conflict, it's basically a direct border dispute between Bhutan and China. And of course, India went to Bhutan's help. Now, when that happened, and in the 8 years since then, what China has done is that China has been ramping up pressure around that region. And if you take if you zoom out a bit, you do see that China's infrastructure development and the border area development, having new villages in the region, and also the unilateral communication that they now have started having with Thimphu, which is Bhutan's capital. Now, this is something which should be taken seriously in India. Of course, India takes it seriously. So you do have a situation where because there is a vulnerability, you might see a bit of destabilization. As far as the Indian side's response is concerned, of course, we have also deployed many troops there. The border security forces there. Several of our deployments are there. So I do not see an all-out war. Okay, that doesn't really make sense. We have a railway network also which is connecting, and basically that's the nerve which is connecting, India to that side, and all the goods and all the trade connectivity between us and, the mainland and the northeast side. So you have that one railway line for the freight transport, and you might expect some kind of a grey zone destabilization happening in those regions. But as far as a full-fledged war is concerned, I'm actually not worried about that scenario, because it is not a scenario that really makes sense. There is no reason for Bangladesh or China, even if they were to, join hands against India, which is again a very outlandish proposition. But I do see that in some ways, China playing a bigger role in the strategic, posture of Bangladesh is bad news for India. And India must be very, very patient at the moment, especially as, so much is going to happen very soon in Bangladesh. Tariq Rahman has returned after 17 years. We will see elections very soon. Begum Khalida Zia is no more. So, there is a lot of volatility, and India must, equip itself of these destabilizations, which are not going to be coming in forms that we expect, right? They might come in cybersecurity, they might, in the form of cybersecurity challenges, they might come in, challenges from a whole host of other actors, right? I mean, from the refugee crisis that we have, etc. So, I mean, we have to equip ourselves, but it is not the same as saying that there could be an all-out war, at least not in my assessment.
Moving on from one region in the South Asia to another, Swasti, there's a question by A Snow who wants to know that why is India providing 450 million in aid to Sri Lanka when Sri Lanka seems to be more closer to China?
Well, again, I mean, that's been a part of India's neighborhood policy. See, India and China do compete for influence in the wider global south, which is, the developing countries. But India doesn't come with deep pockets. It's China that has the economic heft to bring mega infrastructure projects and, BRI projects, etc. India doesn't have that heft, okay, frankly. What India uses is soft power tools, okay, and aid, line of credit, aid, being there when there is a humanitarian disaster, when there is any relief required. India has always done that. And India is also sort of appreciated for that. You can't say that it has no value. I think your question is pertaining more to the fact that why do these countries have the China tilt, right? And why is India doing it? So India has to go on engaging. There is absolutely no comparison between the Indian GDP and the Chinese GDP, and the manner in which the BRI has been sort of envisioned by Xi Jinping after 2013. It is also worth noting that today, with the exception of Bhutan, every single of India's neighbor has already signed up for the BRI. So in that sense, China has already encircled India, if at all. Now, India has to break out of that encirclement and still retain some relevance and diversification and presence in its neighborhood, and India is doing what it can best do. But that's not where the story ends, because you mentioned Sri Lanka. I think one of the things in the last engagement that we had with Sri Lanka, something very interesting happened in Sri Lanka, which is that we joined hands with another very like-minded partner to bring about infrastructure development. And here I'm referring to India and the UAE joining hands for a triangular cooperation, and this kind of a cooperation is called triangular cooperation, where you bring something, you bring reputational advantage, and somebody else brings some money on the table, and then collectively you bring about, let's say, infrastructure projects, etc. And this particular example is from Trincomalee. Trincomalee is a strategically located port on the east coast of Sri Lanka. And what has happened is that there is a three-way deal which was signed between India, Sri Lanka and the UAE. And this agreement sets out a framework of collaboration on a range of infrastructure and energy projects. Now, China is known to have these energy projects. So I think this is something, the triangular cooperation model is a very, very good model where India can come together with other like-minded partners. I gave you an example of Sri Lanka. There can be more, of such examples. For example, Japan is heavily invested in India's northeastern region. So India should definitely join hands with Japan. For example, doing things in Thailand and doing things with, Nepal, etc. The EU is present here in a big way. The French and Germans are present in a big way in Africa. Many of these countries are present in Pacific Island. So I think this is a model that India needs to explore better in order to, better counterbalance China. Left to itself, there is only so much that India can do. I mean, that's a limitation of our own economic, capabilities.
Going ahead, Swasti, there's a question by Shayan Banerjee who wants to know how close is the Russia-India military collaboration and what is the future of Russia-India ties?
Well, of course, Shayan, I would always say that Russia continues to be an important partner. I mean, so much of our legacy platform comes from Russia. But I think in your question, of course, it's a longer question and we have sort of shortened it. I think what you've also been asking about, for example, all these licensed productions and the joint ventures and the TOT that Russia has been given. See, the couple of things. Of course, Russia has been important in our defense industry modernization, and it has given us technology, at least to some extent, when other Western powers were not willing to give it to us, at least not at that price. So that definitely makes Russia an important partner. What we have to understand better is that when we say a transfer of technology, just a couple of things, and that will help you understand why the TOT clause is also not understood well. Now, the first MiG deal was signed in 1961-62, which carried a transfer of technology agreement and said that India is going to be making these jets under licensed production. India has not been, if without Russian help, India will not be able to make anything on its own. Same for Sukhoi Mk-30s as well. It's more of a screwdriver technology that we do here, and that is why if you look at the details of the of self-reliance, we always say indigenized content is this much of percentage. If we genuinely have all TOT, why don't we just say it's 100%, right? And that actually shows you that it is one thing to have a TOT agreement, and it's another thing to say that a full transfer of technology has happened, because nobody is going to give us full transfer of technology. Even if somebody were to give us full transfer of technology, we don't have an ecosystem to actually to absorb it. So those are issues. Even, I mean, I can give you more examples. Look at the Sukhoi Mk-30 fleet, which has to be upgraded. We cannot even upgrade it without IP from Russia, because the IP is with Russia. And that has been cleared by the cabinet committee. Of course, it is going to happen. So Russia continues to be important, but it is not the same as saying that they have given us full transfer of technology, because nobody does it. That's one part. As far as the future of India-Russia relations is concerned in the defense sector, I'm of the opinion that India continues to be reliant on especially the legacy platforms, especially a lot of these upgrades. Okay, so whether it is the BrahMos upgrade, which is Super BrahMos, which is basically to make the BrahMos missiles lighter so that they can be deployed on the super or the upgraded version of Sukhoi Mk-30s, whether it's that, whether it's getting engines for the T-72 tanks or upgrading those engines. So in all of these examples, you see that we really cannot do without Russia's help. Okay, that's one. Then we also require the air defenses. The most advanced air defenses that we have is the S-400s, and even the S-400 missiles we need from Russia. Okay. Now, in due course, of course, we are going to be indigenizing it much more, but that is not where we are right now. So Russia continues to be important. Just a couple of sticking points there, which is one is that the Russian exports after the Russia-Ukraine war have dipped. SIPRI data shows a decline of about 64% in the last 5 years. But if you look at certain studies done by Kazakhstan-based think tanks that I have alluded to and I have referred to in my writings, they say that between 2021 and the end of 2024, which is just during the war years, there has been a decline of 92% in Russian arm exports. Okay, so one is that as long as the war in Ukraine is going on, when will Russia be able to have the capability back to be able to export in the same way? One. Second sticking point is, what about the dependence on China? And this is a factor that we need to study better. The Indian defense establishment is definitely mindful of the impact of Western sanctions. I can give you a number of examples of how this becomes one of the most important discussion pointers now at different strategic discussions. So I can give you two examples. One is that when analysts have been examining all the Russian weapons that have been destroyed in Ukraine, so they find a lot of components. It's not just Chinese components. There are components from the United States, from Japan, from Europe. But the problem is that one doesn't know if these components were sourced before 2022, which means before the war started, or were these components, or did these components make way into Russian defense ecosystem after the war started? So we don't have clarity on that. Okay, that's the first part. The second is that there are reports, and I have written about those reports, where Almes Ante, which is the company that makes the S-400, that conglomerate has recently set up a drone manufacturing plant in China. So what you see on paper and what is happening in reality, these are also two different things. And because this is a situation which is fast evolving right away, so any decisive readings of the situation or any decisive literature on this, any decisive research on this is only going to emerge in some time. So this is what remains to be a sticking point between India and Russia defense equipment, where we need to make sure what level or what degree is the penetration that Chinese equipments have had, or Chinese tech or systems or Chinese chips have had in the Russian weapons, and what are those weapons that are more vulnerable, to such things. So much of it obviously remains classified, but much of it also remains a work in progress because of the sheer nature of the fact that the war is going on. And that is why, from India's perspective, it makes sense for us to basically see the war ends. And the war is not ending, that's a different thing. But the best case scenario for us is the war ends, and then, the sanctions could be lifted, and therefore we can also have some business as usual. But right now it's not the case.
There's one question by Shivani Das Mali on how the current situation in Bangladesh is going to affect India. And then there's a question by Tushar Patidar, who wants to know that Jashimuddin Rahmani, the Ansarullah Bangla head, was released from prison last year after Sheikh Hasina's ouster. How do you think this will affect India?
Now, the situation in Bangladesh continues to be precarious. I mean, as far as Ansarullah, Jasimuddin Rahmani's bail is concerned, that happened, I think, just a month after,
same month,
or the same
August.
month when Sheikh Hasina was ousted. So that is an old news, but it does show that there has been a rise of extremist elements. There's been a rise of radicalism. There's been a rise of especially Islamic radicalism in Bangladesh, and India and many other countries have been raising concerns about it. Now, long story short, you do see that Muhammad Yunus's tenure, which lasted about a year and a half, was not able to really ensure communal harmony or those kind of things. I mean, at least that is what he was known for, and that is what everybody expected from him. On the contrary, you did see that there's been a rise of Islamist elements and basically extremist elements. So as far as Jasimuddin Rahmani's bail is concerned, it is simply a reflection of that, and even back then India had taken a very, strong note. Now, coming to the present times, the situation continues to be precarious and fragile. As you know that the Awami League is banned from contesting in the upcoming elections, which are slated for February. So in a couple of months, there'll be elections. In many ways, the elections, the results seem to be clearly in favor of Tariq Rahman, who is Khalida Zia's son and who was in exile for about 17, 18 years and who has returned finally to Bangladesh. And he has also given his own slogans and his own things. So we will see how it evolves. I think from India's perspective, India, I think officially has also confirmed that we look forward to working with whoever is a stakeholder in Bangladesh, and which is a mature thing to do, because one of the long-standing criticisms of Indian foreign policy in its neighborhood has been sort of backing the pro-India factions, and what we'll end up doing to ourselves is that we'll end up becoming victims to the internal electoral politics of those countries. So instead, I think it is maturity on the part of India to show willingness to work constructively on whoever becomes the stakeholder in Bangladesh. This is what we've been doing in the rest of our with the rest of our neighbors as well. This was one of the reasons why we had a complete, reversal of Maldivian position. Okay, so we have to be patient, we have to be watchful, and we have to also see how the Bangladesh, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Turkey, and all these four countries together, how their equation is evolving, because frankly, it is their own independent foreign policy. Little India can do to sort of, change that. But like I said, and I think that's been one of the key takeaways of 2025 as well, that India has to work on sort of strengthening our own core strengths and closing the gaps and identifying our problems instead of worrying all the time about whoever comes to power. India has to make sure that the 4,000-kilometer border that we share with Bangladesh can be put to better use, can be used for better connectivity, better trade. We have to leverage people-to-people ties. I mean, these are things that will always remain relevant, and we have to also come out of. In fact, if you check out the latest worldview I did with Dr. Raja Mohan, you see that Dr. Raja Mohan goes on sort of discussing this very important factor that there is so much that India can do and there's so much India should do. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, keep our guards up, that is going to be enough for now. And as far as Bangladesh is concerned, we are all waiting to see what really happens there. So we are going to come back to that again, I'm sure.
Coming to our final question for this episode, Swasti, we have a question by Sanchit Suman, who wants a brief overview of why there is this repeated confrontation between Thailand and Cambodia and what exactly is the objective and why did the last peace deal fail?
Now, in short, the roots of this particular war goes back to the colonial past, and particularly, the colonial past where Britain was an actor and France was an actor and there was a treaty, but the final borders were not really settled. And if you see the current fighting and if you look at the map, here, you will see that there are hotspots only because of that interpretation. Okay. So, for example, the Priya Vihar temple remains to be a hotspot, and I have done enough work on that. I can put the link in the description box for you to go and see if you're interested in understanding the details of it. Now, why it keeps faltering is not just because the essential fault lines remain unresolved, but it's also because, if you look at the ASEAN, the 10 countries that make the ASEAN, now while it is touted as a geo-economic bloc, when it comes to defense, it is a very fragmented, bloc. There are certain countries which are tilting more towards the United States, and there are others like Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia that are tilting towards China. And then there are others. I mean, Russia is also a factor there. Turkey is also now becoming a huge factor there, by the way, especially in the defense, sector. Now, when Donald Trump, negotiated an agreement between them, it was done in a hurried manner. It was, I think, spearheaded by sort of Donald Trump. It was carried out by Malaysia, and it was done in a manner. And anybody that understands the fundamental causes of why these two sides are fighting would have known even then that this is not going to stay. Right? And this is exactly what has happened. So right now there is a ceasefire, but one doesn't know how long is that going to continue. Also remember that from India's perspective, because we track what all China is doing, so China is also pretty active in Cambodia, and China has been expanding its role at the Ream naval base on Cambodia's southern coast. Now officially it's not a military base, but when you look at the satellite imagery, you do see that it is capable of in length and everything, it is very similar to the kind of a base that China has at Djibouti. Which is again capable of docking its largest aircraft carriers. So those are things that also make, China's presence there make the entire situation very complicated, even though Thailand has much better military capabilities, but China's presence over Cambodia then complicates the matters, a bit. And long story short, currently, there is also from Thailand's part, there has been a kind of a failure to urge the international community to tell Cambodia to remove those landmines, So if you see, now when you read the terms, you see that they are the two sides are going to reach an agreement and etc. But as long as that doesn't go away, you will always have the Thai soldiers stepping on them, dying, and then that becomes a trigger for starting the war again. So there's of course a historical problem, like from the colonial times. Then there is a political problems in terms of how the political elite on both sides have tried to mitigate it and have not succeeded. Then there is a presence of external actors, like I just mentioned, and ultimately, the ASEAN community per se is not able to find a lasting solution, because and these are the reasons why it remains so precarious. And in my opinion, something or the other will again happen till the time the fundamental reasons, or there is willingness on both sides to make sure that there is no active fighting. Okay, and so far I think those conditions have not been met. So this is what is happening in Thailand and Cambodia.
And with that, Swasti, we come to an end of this episode. We look forward to your questions in the next year. And to those of you who are watching it on the 31st of December, we wish you a very happy New Year.
A very happy New Year from my side as well.